Detective Sarah Chen had been with the Millbrook Police Department for 12 years, but she had never received a call quite like the one that came in at 2:47 p.m. on October 13, 2024. Construction foreman Mike Rodriguez was on the other end of the line, his voice shaking with something that sounded like fear mixed with disbelief. "Detective Chen, you need to get down to 847 Maple Street immediately. We found something that doesn't make any sense." Chen checked her notes. 847 Maple Street was the old Mitchell house, abandoned since 2002, when the family had moved away after the disappearance of their 4 children. The property had sat empty for over 2 decades, slowly deteriorating until the city finally decided to renovate it for low-income housing. "What did you find, Mr. Rodriguez? I can't explain it over the phone. You have to see it yourself." When Chen arrived at the Mitchell house 20 minutes later, she found Rodriguez and his construction crew standing in the front yard, all of them looking like they had seen a ghost. The house was a typical 1980s colonial that had clearly been beautiful once, but 22 years of abandonment had taken their toll. Broken windows, peeling paint, and overgrown landscaping gave it the appearance of a place that time had forgotten. "Mr. Rodriguez," Chen approached the foreman, "what exactly did you find?" Rodriguez, a man in his 50s who had been in construction for over 30 years, looked at Chen with an expression she had never seen on a grown man's face before. "Detective, we were gutting the dining room when we broke through a wall that had been sealed up. Behind it we found—" He paused, struggling to find words. "We found a birthday party." Chen frowned. "What do you mean, you found a birthday party?" "I mean we found a dining room set up for a child's birthday party, exactly as it was left 22 years ago. And Detective, the birthday cake is still fresh." Chen felt a chill run down her spine. She knew the Mitchell case by heart, even though it had happened years before she joined the department. The disappearance of Emma, Jake, Sophie, and Tommy Mitchell was Millbrook's most famous unsolved case. 4 siblings who had vanished without a trace during 6-year-old Tommy's birthday party on October 13, 2002. "Mr. Rodriguez, are you telling me you found the actual room where the children disappeared?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you. And Detective, that cake, it looks like it was baked this morning." Chen followed Rodriguez into the house through rooms that had been stripped down to the studs by the construction crew. The air smelled of dust and decay, and sunlight filtered through broken windows, creating an eerie atmosphere that made Chen's skin crawl. They reached the dining room, where Rodriguez's crew had knocked a hole through what appeared to be a hastily constructed drywall partition. Through the opening, Chen could see into a room that looked like it existed in a different time zone entirely. The dining room was decorated for a children's birthday party. Colorful streamers hung from the ceiling, balloons bobbed gently in air currents that seemed to come from nowhere, and a large banner reading, "Happy 6th Birthday Tommy," stretched across one wall. The furniture was arranged exactly as it would have been for a party. Chairs pulled up to a table, set with paper plates, plastic cups, and party favors. But it was the birthday cake that made Chen's blood run cold. In the center of the table sat a large chocolate cake with bright blue frosting and 6 colorful candles. The cake looked perfect, fresh, moist, as if it had just come out of the oven. The frosting was smooth and unblemished, the decorative flowers looked like they had been piped on minutes ago, and the candles stood straight and tall, their wicks unburned. "This is impossible," Chen whispered, stepping through the opening to get a closer look. "That's what we said," Rodriguez replied. "Detective, we've been in construction for decades. We know what 22-year-old food looks like. It doesn't look like this." Chen examined the cake without touching it. Not only did it look fresh, but it smelled fresh too. The sweet aroma of chocolate and vanilla filled the air, with no trace of the mustiness or decay that should have been present after more than 2 decades. "Mr. Rodriguez, How exactly was this room sealed? Somebody built a wall across the doorway from the outside, then finished it to match the rest of the house. You couldn't tell there was ever a doorway there. We only found it because we were removing all the interior walls for the renovation. Chen looked around the room more carefully. Everything was preserved in perfect condition. The paper plates showed no signs of aging. The plastic cups looked like they had just been unwrapped, and even the streamers and balloons appeared fresh and vibrant. Was this room sealed immediately after the children disappeared? Had to be. According to the building permits we found, the wall was constructed in late October 2002, just a couple weeks after the incident. Chen made careful notes while Rodriguez continued explaining what they had found, but her attention kept returning to the birthday cake. She had investigated hundreds of cases involving missing persons, but she had never encountered physical evidence that seemed to defy the basic laws of nature. Mr. Rodriguez, I need you and your crew to stop work on this room immediately. This is now a crime scene. After 22 years. Chen called for backup and a forensics team, then began the process of securing the scene. As she waited for additional personnel to arrive, she used the time to review everything she knew about the Mitchell case. On October 13, 2002, David and Karen Mitchell had thrown a birthday party for their youngest son, Tommy, who was turning 6. The party was supposed to be a small family affair with just the 4 Mitchell children and a few close relatives. David Mitchell had been at work that afternoon. He was a traveling salesman who had gotten called away on an emergency client visit. Karen Mitchell had been in the kitchen preparing food when she heard Tommy blow out his birthday candles in the dining room. According to her statement to police, Karen had been in the kitchen for no more than 10 minutes. When she returned to the dining room to serve the cake, all 4 children were gone. Emma Mitchell, 12, the responsible oldest sister, Jake Mitchell, 10, the athletic middle child, Sophie Mitchell, 8, the artistic dreamer, and Tommy Mitchell, 6, the birthday boy who had been so excited about his party that he had been awake since dawn. All 4 children had vanished without a trace. The dining room showed no signs of struggle. The back door was still locked from the inside. The windows were closed and latched. It was as if the children had simply evaporated. The initial police investigation had been extensive. Every neighbor was interviewed. Every registered sex offender in a 50-mile radius was questioned. Every possible lead was followed. Search teams combed through miles of surrounding countryside. Missing persons flyers were distributed throughout Ohio and neighboring states. Nothing was ever found. No witnesses, no physical evidence, no credible sightings. The Mitchell children had vanished as completely as if they had never existed. The case had destroyed the Mitchell family. Karen Mitchell had suffered a complete nervous breakdown and had been hospitalized for several months. David Mitchell had blamed himself for not being there to protect his children. The couple had divorced within a year, and both had moved away from Millbrook, unable to bear living in the house where their children had disappeared. The house had sat empty ever since, becoming a local legend and a source of ghost stories for neighborhood children. But now, 22 years later, Chen was standing in the actual room where the children had vanished, looking at evidence that challenged everything she thought she knew about the possible and impossible. The forensics team arrived an hour later, led by Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the county's chief medical examiner and forensics expert. Dr. Martinez had handled hundreds of crime scenes during her career, but Chen could see that this one was affecting her differently than usual. "Detective Chen," Dr. Martinez said after examining the sealed room, "I need to ask you a question, and I want you to give me a completely honest answer." "Of course. Is this some kind of elaborate hoax?" Chen looked around the preserved party room again. "Dr. Martinez, if this is a hoax, it's the most sophisticated one I've ever seen. Someone would have had to maintain this room in perfect condition for 22 years, including keeping a birthday cake fresh without any source of refrigeration. That's what I was afraid you'd say. Dr. Martinez and her team began the careful process of documenting and testing everything in the room. They took photographs from every angle, collected samples from the cake and other perishable items, and tested the air quality and environmental conditions. What they found defied explanation. "Detective," Dr. Martinez reported after running preliminary tests, "the cake isn't just fresh. According to our analysis, it was baked approximately 6 hours ago." Chen stared at the forensics expert. 6 hours ago? The chemical composition of the ingredients, the moisture content, the cellular structure of the cake, everything indicates that this cake was baked this morning. That's impossible. I know it's impossible, but it's also what the evidence shows. The forensics team continued their analysis throughout the afternoon, and each new discovery added to the mystery rather than solving it. The paper plates tested as if they had been manufactured recently. The balloons contained helium that should have escaped decades ago, but they were still floating. Even the air in the room had unusual properties. It was cleaner and fresher than the air in the rest of the house, with no trace of the dust and pollutants that should have accumulated over 2 decades. "Dr. Martinez," Chen asked as the forensics team was packing up, "in your professional opinion, what could cause a room to be preserved like this?" "Detective, in my professional opinion, nothing could cause a room to be preserved like this. What we're seeing here violates the basic laws of physics, chemistry, and biology." That evening, Chen sat in her office reviewing the forensics reports and trying to make sense of what they had discovered. She had handled her share of unusual cases, but this one was pushing her into territory that had nothing to do with conventional police work. She decided to interview some of the original witnesses from the 2002 case, starting with the neighbors who had been questioned 22 years earlier. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, now 89 years old, had lived next door to the Mitchells in 2002 and was still living in the same house. When Chen visited her the next morning, Mrs. Blackwood was surprisingly sharp and had clear memories of the day the children disappeared. "I remember that day like it was yesterday," Mrs. Blackwood told Chen as they sat in her kitchen. "It was such a beautiful October afternoon, perfect weather for a birthday party. Did you see anything unusual that day?" "Detective, I saw something that I've never told anyone about because I was afraid people would think I was losing my mind." Chen leaned forward with interest. "What did you see?" "I was in my garden around 2:30 in the afternoon when I heard children laughing from the Mitchell house. But it wasn't normal laughter. It sounded distant, like it was coming from far away, even though I knew the children were right next door." "What happened next?" "I looked over at the Mitchell house, and I saw something that still gives me chills. The windows in the dining room were glowing." "Glowing how?" "Like there was a bright light inside, but not like electric lights. More like sunlight, but much brighter. The whole room seemed to be filled with this golden light that was so bright I could see it, even though it was daytime." Chen made careful notes. "How long did this last?" "Maybe 5 minutes. Then the light faded, and everything went quiet. Too quiet. I didn't hear the children anymore, and when Mrs. Mitchell started calling for them a little while later, I knew something terrible had happened." "Why didn't you tell the police about this in 2002? Mrs. Blackwood sighed. "Detective, I was 67 years old then, and my husband had just been diagnosed with dementia. I was afraid that if I told people I was seeing strange lights, they'd think I was developing dementia too." Chen's next interview was with Tom Bradley, who had been the mail carrier for the neighborhood in 2002. Bradley, now retired, remembered the Mitchell case clearly because he had been the one to alert police that something was wrong when he saw Karen Mitchell running frantically around her yard calling for her children. I was delivering mail around 3 p.m. when I saw Mrs. Mitchell come running out of her house, Bradley told Chen. She was screaming for her kids, checking the backyard, looking under bushes, obviously panicked. Did you see anything unusual before that? Actually, yes. When I was walking up to their mailbox around 2:45, I heard what sounded like children singing "Happy Birthday." But here's the weird thing. It sounded like a lot more than 4 kids singing. How many voices did you hear? Dozens. Like a whole classroom of children singing together. I remember thinking it was odd because I knew the Mitchells were only having a small family party. Chen felt chills running down her arms. What happened when you heard Mrs. Mitchell calling for the children? I went to help her search. We looked everywhere, the basement, the attic, every closet, under every bed. Those kids had vanished completely. That afternoon, Chen decided to visit the Mitchell house again to examine the sealed room in daylight. As she stood in the preserved dining room, looking at the impossible birthday cake, she tried to piece together a timeline that made sense. Based on the witness statements, something unusual had begun happening around 2:30 p.m. on October 13th, 2002. Mrs. Blackwood had seen strange lights in the dining room. Tom Bradley had heard what sounded like dozens of children singing "Happy Birthday," and by 3 p.m. all 4 Mitchell children had vanished without a trace, but the cake on the table suggested that whatever had happened was still happening. The forensics evidence indicated that the cake had been baked that morning, which meant that somehow the birthday party was continuing, even 22 years later. Chen's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Dr. Martinez with the results of additional tests. "Detective, you need to sit down for this." "I'm listening." "We ran DNA tests on the cake frosting, and we found something that shouldn't be possible." "What did you find?" "We found DNA from all 4 Mitchell children. Fresh DNA, as if they had been in contact with the cake recently." Chen felt the world tilt around her. "Dr. Martinez, are you telling me that Emma, Jake, Sophie and Tommy Mitchell have been in that room recently?" "I'm telling you that according to our forensic evidence, those children were in contact with that birthday cake within the last 24 hours. But they disappeared 22 years ago." "I know they disappeared 22 years ago. But detective, science doesn't lie. Their DNA is on that cake, and it's fresh." That night, Chen sat in the sealed dining room with the impossible birthday cake, trying to understand what she was dealing with. She had called for additional forensics experts, consulted with physicists from nearby universities, and even reached out to federal investigators who specialized in unusual cases. But no one could explain how 4 children who had vanished in 2002 could have left fresh DNA evidence on a cake that was somehow still fresh after 22 years. As Chen sat in the quiet room, surrounded by party decorations that should have decayed decades ago, she began to realize that she wasn't just investigating a missing persons case. She was investigating something that challenged the fundamental nature of reality itself. And somewhere, somehow, Emma, Jake, Sophie and Tommy Mitchell were still celebrating a birthday party that had begun 22 years ago and apparently never ended. The question was, where were they celebrating it? Detective Sarah Chen's investigation into the Mitchell children's disappearance had attracted attention far beyond Millbrook's small police department. Within 48 hours of discovering the preserved dining room, she found herself working with a team that included FBI paranormal investigators, quantum physicists from Ohio State University, and specialists in temporal anomalies from the Department of Energy's Unexplained Phenomena Division. Dr. James Patterson, a quantum physicist who had spent his career studying time-space anomalies, arrived from Columbus on October 15th with equipment Chen had never seen before. His instruments were designed to detect what he called temporal distortions and dimensional fluctuations. Detective Chen, Dr. Patterson said as he set up his equipment in the Mitchell dining room, what you've discovered here appears to be a localized temporal anomaly. Time seems to be functioning differently in this space than in the surrounding area. Chen watched as Dr. Patterson's instruments registered readings that he described as highly unusual and theoretically impossible. What does that mean in practical terms? It means that this room exists in a temporal bubble. While 22 years have passed in our reality, significantly less time, perhaps only hours or days, has passed within this space. Dr. Patterson's preliminary readings showed that time was moving approximately 2,120 times slower in the dining room than in normal reality. If my calculations are correct, he explained, what we perceive as 22 years would be experienced as roughly 7 days within this temporal field. So, the children could still be alive. If they're within this temporal field, they would have aged only days while decades passed in our world. While Dr. Patterson analyzed the temporal anomalies, FBI agent Rebecca Martinez, no relation to the forensics expert, was investigating the case from a paranormal perspective. Agent Martinez specialized in cases involving unexplained disappearances and had worked on similar incidents across the United States. Detective Chen, Agent Martinez explained during their first meeting, the Mitchell case fits a pattern we've been tracking for the past 2 decades. Children disappearing from birthday parties, family gatherings, or other celebratory events, often leaving behind preserved evidence that shouldn't exist. How many similar cases have you documented? 17 confirmed cases since 1995. Children vanishing during celebrations, with party decorations or food found in impossibly preserved condition years later. Agent Martinez showed Chen case files from across the country. In Vermont, 3 children had disappeared from a Christmas party in 2008, and in 2020, investigators found their unopened presents under a Christmas tree, still wrapped and fresh as if they had been placed there that morning. In Nevada, twins had vanished from their 7th birthday party in 2011, and their birthday cake was discovered in 2019, still decorated and edible after 8 years. What's the connection between these cases? All the disappearances occurred during moments of pure joy and celebration, and in every case, the children seem to have been taken to what we can only describe as a parallel celebration space. Agent Martinez's theory was that the children weren't dead or kidnapped in any conventional sense. They had been transported to an alternate dimension where their celebrations continued indefinitely, existing in a state of permanent happiness and childhood joy. But why? Chen asked. What could cause this? We don't know yet, but we have theories. The most compelling theory came from Dr. Sarah Williams, a physicist who specialized in the intersection of human consciousness and quantum mechanics. Dr. Williams had arrived from MIT with research suggesting that intense human emotions could sometimes create rifts in space-time. The common factor in all these cases, Dr. Williams explained, is that the disappearances occurred during moments of peak emotional intensity, particularly joy, excitement, and love. Children's birthday parties represent some of the purest forms of happiness and family bonding. Are you suggesting that happiness can create dimensional portals? I'm suggesting that consciousness affects reality in ways we're only beginning to understand. When children experience intense joy in the presence of deep family love, it's possible that their combined consciousness could spontaneously create what we call pocket dimensions, small alternate realities where that happiness can exist eternally. Dr. Williams showed Chen research data from quantum consciousness experiments. We've documented cases where human emotion has measurably affected the behavior of subatomic particles. If consciousness can influence quantum reality, it's not inconceivable that it could create larger-scale reality distortions. While the scientists analyzed the technical aspects of the case, Chen continued interviewing witnesses from 2002, this time armed with a better understanding of what she was looking for. Her conversation with Father Michael O'Brien, who had been the pastor at St. Mary's Catholic Church in 2002, provided crucial new information. Father O'Brien, now 78 and retired, had known the Mitchell family well. "Detective," Father O'Brien told Chen when she visited him at the church rectory, "I conducted Tommy Mitchell's baptism when he was an infant. I knew that family intimately, and I can tell you that they had something special." "What do you mean by special?" "The love in that family was extraordinary. I've been a priest for 54 years, and I've seen thousands of families, but the Mitchells had a connection that was almost supernatural in its intensity." "Can you be more specific?" "The children were unusually close to each other and to their parents. They had what some people might call psychic connections. Karen Mitchell used to tell me that her children could sense each other's emotions even when they were in different rooms." Father O'Brien described instances where the Mitchell children had demonstrated what appeared to be telepathic abilities. Emma had once woken up in the middle of the night crying because Jake had fallen off his bike 3 miles away at a friend's house. Sophie had painted pictures of places she had never been that turned out to be exact depictions of locations where her siblings were playing. "Did you see the children on the day they disappeared?" "I saw them that morning at Mass. And Detective, there was something different about them that day." "Different how?" "They were more radiant than usual. All 4 children seemed to be glowing with happiness and excitement about Tommy's party. But more than that, they seemed unified, like they were operating as a single consciousness rather than 4 separate children." Father O'Brien's observations were corroborated by Sarah Henderson, who had been Tommy's first-grade teacher in 2002. Mrs. Henderson, now retired, had visited the Mitchell house on the morning of October 13th to drop off a birthday present for Tommy. "I remember thinking that I had never seen children who were so perfectly happy," Mrs. Henderson told Chen. "All 4 of them were practically vibrating with excitement about the party, but what struck me most was how synchronized they were." "Synchronized?" "They were finishing each other's sentences, moving in harmony, almost like they were performing a choreographed dance. It was beautiful, but also somehow otherworldly." The most significant new witness testimony came from Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, who had been the family pediatrician in 2002. Dr. Morgan had examined all 4 Mitchell children just 2 weeks before their disappearance for their annual checkups. "Detective Chen," Dr. Morgan said during their interview, "I need to share something that I documented in my medical records but never reported to police because I didn't think it was relevant at the time." "What did you find?" "All 4 Mitchell children showed identical brainwave patterns during their EEGs. This is medically impossible unless the children are identical twins, which they weren't." Dr. Morgan explained that brainwave patterns are as unique as fingerprints. No 2 people should have identical neural signatures unless they share identical genetics. But the Mitchell children's brainwaves were not just similar, they were perfectly synchronized. When I monitored all 4 children simultaneously, their neural activity was operating in perfect harmony. What could cause that? In my 30 years of pediatric medicine, I had never seen anything like it. The only explanation I could conceive was that the children had developed some form of shared consciousness. These revelations led Chen to request additional forensic analysis of the preserved dining room. She specifically asked Dr. Martinez's team to look for evidence of unusual brain activity or electromagnetic signatures. The results were startling. "Detective, Dr. Yu," Martinez reported after a 3rd round of forensic analysis, "we're detecting residual electromagnetic patterns throughout the dining room that are consistent with intense neurological activity." "What kind of neurological activity?" The pattern suggests that 4 different brains were operating in perfect synchronization at the time of the disappearance. But more than that, the electromagnetic signature indicates that their combined neural activity reached levels we've never recorded in human subjects. Dr. Martinez showed Chen brain scan data from the residual electromagnetic patterns. The children's combined consciousness appears to have generated enough neural energy to affect local reality on a quantum level. Meanwhile, Dr. Patterson's temporal analysis was revealing additional impossible details about the dining room. His instruments showed that time wasn't just moving slower in the space, it was moving in loops. Detective Chen, Dr. Patterson explained, the temporal field in this room is cyclical. Every 24 hours in our time, the room experiences what appears to be the same 40-minute period over and over again. You're saying the birthday party is repeating. That's exactly what I'm saying. Based on our readings, Tommy Mitchell's birthday party has been running on a continuous loop for 22 years. Dr. Patterson's equipment had detected audio residue within the temporal field, ghostly echoes of conversations and activities that had occurred during the original party. We're picking up fragments of the children's voices, he told Chen. They're still in there, still celebrating, still playing party games and singing happy birthday. Chen asked Dr. Patterson to enhance the audio signals, and what she heard changed her understanding of the case completely. The voices were clear and joyful. Emma Mitchell talking about how special Tommy's birthday was. Jake Mitchell laughing at a joke someone had told. Sophie Mitchell singing along with the birthday song. And Tommy Mitchell, the birthday boy, expressing pure delight at being the center of attention on his special day. But the voices weren't just memories or recordings. They were real-time audio from an ongoing celebration. Dr. Patterson, Chen asked, are you telling me that the children are still in that room, still having the party? According to our instruments, that's exactly what's happening. They exist within the temporal loop, experiencing the same perfect birthday party over and over again, completely unaware that 22 years have passed in our reality. This revelation led to an urgent question. If the children were still alive within the temporal field, was there a way to communicate with them or bring them back? Dr. Williams proposed an experimental approach. If the children's consciousness created this temporal anomaly, it's possible that consciousness could also dissolve it. But it would require someone with a strong emotional connection to the children, someone whose love for them was powerful enough to penetrate the temporal barrier. The obvious candidates were David and Karen Mitchell, the children's parents. Chen had been trying to locate them since the dining room was discovered, but tracking down people who had moved away 22 years earlier was proving challenging. She finally located Karen Mitchell, now Karen Stevens, living in Portland, Oregon, where she worked as a librarian and had remarried. When Chen called to explain the situation, Karen's reaction was immediate and intense. Detective, are you telling me that my children might still be alive? Mrs. Stevens, I'm telling you that we have evidence suggesting your children exist within a temporal anomaly at your old house. We believe they're trapped in a loop that repeats the birthday party indefinitely. Karen was silent for a long moment. Detective, I need to come home. David Mitchell was more difficult to locate. After the divorce, he had changed his name to David Harrison and had moved to Alaska, where he worked on fishing boats and lived a deliberately isolated life. When Chen finally reached him by phone, his response was different from his ex-wife's. Detective, I've spent 22 years trying to forget that day. I can't go through this again. Mr. Harrison, your children may still be alive. Don't you want to see them again? Of course I want to see them again. But detective, what if this is just some cruel hoax? What if I come back to Millbrook and there's nothing there but false hope? Chen spent an hour on the phone with David, explaining the scientific evidence, the forensic findings, and the testimony from witnesses. Gradually, she convinced him that the situation was real and that his children needed him. "I'll be there in 2 days," he finally agreed. While waiting for the Mitchell parents to arrive, Chen and the scientific team continued analyzing the temporal anomaly. Dr. Patterson had developed a theory about how to potentially extract the children from the time loop. "The key," he explained, "is that the temporal field was created by the children's combined consciousness at a moment of peak emotional intensity. To dissolve it, we need to recreate that same emotional intensity, but with the intention of bringing them home instead of preserving the moment." "How do we do that?" "We need their parents to enter the temporal field and call them home with the same love that originally created the anomaly." Dr. Williams added her perspective. "The children are trapped in a moment of perfect happiness. To leave that moment, they need to be offered something even more valuable. The knowledge that their parents have been waiting for them, that they're loved and missed, and that their family is ready to be reunited." The plan was risky. Entering the temporal field could trap the parents in the same loop as their children. But it was also the only viable option for rescuing 4 children who had been lost in time for 22 years. Karen Stevens arrived in Millbrook on October 17th, followed by David Harrison on October 18th. When Chen brought them to the Mitchell house and showed them the preserved dining room, both parents broke down completely. "It's exactly as I left it," Karen whispered, staring at the birthday cake with tears streaming down her face. Tommy was so excited about that cake. He had been talking about it for weeks. David stood in the doorway, unable to enter the room. "I can't believe they're still in there. After all these years, they're still celebrating his birthday." Dr. Patterson explained the rescue plan to both parents. "You'll need to enter the temporal field together. Once inside, you'll experience the same time dilation as your children. You'll need to find them within the loop and convince them to come home with you." "What if we get trapped too?" Karen asked. "That's a possibility," Dr. Patterson admitted. "But you're their parents. Your love for them created their ability to affect reality on a quantum level. That same love should give you the power to bring them home." Chen watched as Karen and David Mitchell, divorced for over 20 years, joined hands for the first time since their children disappeared. "We'll bring them home," Karen said firmly. "Whatever it takes, we'll bring our children home." The rescue attempt was scheduled for the following morning, exactly 22 years and 1 week after the Mitchell children had vanished from their birthday party. But as Chen left the Mitchell house that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that the next day would either reunite a family that had been separated by impossible circumstances or trap 2 more people in a celebration that had already lasted far longer than any birthday party should. The children were still in there, still laughing, still singing happy birthday in voices that hadn't aged a day in 22 years. Tomorrow, their parents would try to bring them home. October 20th, 2024, 2:30 p.m., exactly 22 years to the minute from when the Mitchell children had first vanished. Detective Sarah Chen stood outside the Mitchell house with a team of scientists, FBI agents, and 2 parents who were about to attempt something that had never been tried before, entering a temporal anomaly to rescue their children from a birthday party that had been happening for over 2 decades. Karen Stevens and David Harrison, once Karen and David Mitchell, stood hand in hand at the entrance to the preserved dining room. Both had aged 22 years since they last saw their children, while Emma, Jake, Sophie and Tommy remained 6, 8, 10 and 12 years old, trapped in an eternal moment of childhood joy. Dr. James Patterson monitored his instruments carefully. "The temporal field is at its most stable right now," he reported. "If you're going to attempt entry, this is the optimal time." Dr. Sarah Williams attached biosensors to both parents. Remember, once you cross into the temporal field, you'll experience time dilation. Minutes in there could feel like hours. Your task is to find the children within their loop and convince them to come home with you. Agent Rebecca Martinez gave final instructions. Based on our analysis of similar cases, the children will initially perceive you as part of their celebration. You'll need to break through their temporal consciousness gradually, helping them remember that there's a world outside their birthday party. Karen squeezed David's hand tighter. Despite their divorce and 22 years of separation, facing the possibility of seeing their children again had reconnected them in ways that transcended their past conflicts. "Are you ready?" David asked his ex-wife. "I've been ready for 22 years, Karen replied. Together, they stepped across the threshold into the temporal field. The change was immediate and disorienting. The moment they crossed into the dining room, the colors became more vivid, the air became filled with the sounds of children's laughter, and the birthday cake began to glow with a warm, golden light that seemed to emanate from within. "Mommy! Daddy!" The voices came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through dimensions that folded in on themselves. Karen and David found themselves standing in a dining room that was simultaneously the one they remembered from 2002 and something far more magical. The room stretched infinitely in all directions, filled with birthday decorations that sparkled like stars. Balloons floated overhead in impossible colors that had no names, and streamers moved in breezes that carried the scent of childhood dreams. And there, around a table that seemed to exist at the center of all realities, were their children. Emma Mitchell, 12 years old and radiant with the wisdom of a child who had experienced perfect happiness for 22 years. Jake Mitchell, 10 years old and vibrant with energy that seemed to make the air around him dance. Sophie Mitchell, 8 years old and glowing with an artistic creativity that painted flowers in the air with her laughter. And Tommy Mitchell, 6 years old and shining with the pure joy of a child whose birthday had never ended. "You came to my party," Tommy exclaimed, running toward his parents with arms outstretched. Karen dropped to her knees and caught her youngest son in an embrace that she had been waiting 22 years to give. The moment she touched him, she felt the temporal field respond. Reality rippled around them like water disturbed by a stone. "Tommy, my baby," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I've missed you so much." But Mommy, I just saw you in the kitchen," Tommy said with the confused innocence of a 6-year-old. "You were making sandwiches for after cake." David embraced Emma, Jake, and Sophie simultaneously, and the temporal field rippled again, more strongly this time. The children looked exactly as they had on the day they disappeared, but there was something different in their eyes, a depth of experience that suggested they had lived through more than just repeated birthday parties. "Daddy," Emma said, her voice carrying a maturity that seemed older than her 12-year-old appearance, "we've been waiting for you." "Waiting for us?" Karen asked, still holding Tommy. "But sweetheart, you just saw us this morning." "No, Mommy," Sophie said, her artist's perception seeing truths that others missed. "We've been waiting a very long time. We knew you would come when you were ready." Jake, always the athlete, demonstrated his understanding in a different way. "Watch this, Dad," he said, and began moving through the party space in ways that defied physics, running up walls and across the ceiling as if gravity was merely a suggestion. "We learned how to do lots of things while we were here," Emma explained. "Time works differently, so we had time to learn everything." As the family reunion continued, the temporal field around them began to shift and change. The birthday party expanded to show not just Tommy's 6th birthday, but echoes of all the birthdays the children had missed. Emma's 13th through 34th birthdays, Jake's 11th through 32nd birthdays, Sophie's 9th through 30th birthdays, and Tommy's 7th through 28th birthdays. "We celebrated all of them," Emma told her parents. Every birthday that passed in your world, we celebrated here. We never stopped being your children. The scientific equipment outside the temporal field was registering massive energy fluctuations. Dr. Patterson watched his instruments with growing concern and excitement. "Detective Chen," he called out, "the temporal distortions are increasing exponentially. Whatever's happening in there is affecting the fundamental structure of space-time in the entire area." Dr. Williams monitored the biosensors connected to Karen and David. Their brainwave patterns are synchronizing with the temporal field. They're becoming part of the anomaly. Inside the temporal bubble, the Mitchell family was experiencing a reunion that transcended normal reality. The children showed their parents everything they had learned during their extended stay in the birthday dimension. Sophie had mastered art forms that didn't exist in the normal world, painting with light and music and pure emotion. Jake had learned to move through space and time like an athlete competing in interdimensional sports. Emma had developed wisdom and knowledge that came from experiencing thousands of repeated perfect moments. And Tommy had grown in understanding while remaining eternally 6, becoming a child who comprehended love and family in ways that few adults ever achieve. "It's been wonderful here," Emma explained to her parents. "We've been happy every single day. No sadness, no fear, no growing up and growing apart. But we missed you," Jake added. "Even in perfect happiness, we missed our mommy and daddy." "So we waited," Sophie said. "We knew that love strong enough to create this place would be strong enough to bring you to us when the time was right. And now you're here," Tommy concluded, "so we can all be happy together forever." The children's offer was tempting beyond words. Karen and David could feel the seductive pull of the temporal field, the promise of eternal happiness with their children in a place where nothing bad could ever happen, where the family would never face loss or separation again. But Karen, drawing on 22 years of growth and healing, recognized something that her children, despite their enhanced understanding, couldn't see. "My beautiful children," she said, gathering all 4 of them close, "this place is wonderful, and you've been happy here, but happiness that never changes isn't really happiness anymore." "What do you mean, Mommy?" Tommy asked. "I mean that real joy comes from experiencing all of life, the sad parts and the happy parts, the easy parts and the hard parts. You've been celebrating the same birthday for 22 years, but you haven't grown, you haven't learned what it means to overcome challenges, and you haven't experienced the kind of love that comes from choosing to be together, even when it's difficult." David nodded, understanding what his ex-wife was trying to communicate. "Kids, your mom and I have learned something important during the years you've been gone. We learned that perfect moments are precious exactly because they don't last forever. We learned that families aren't just about being happy together," Karen continued. "They're about supporting each other through everything life brings, good and bad." Emma, with her enhanced wisdom, was the first to understand. "You want us to come home to a world where we'll get older, where things will be difficult sometimes, where we might be sad or scared." "Yes," David said honestly, "because that's also a world where we'll grow together, where we'll face challenges and overcome them as a family, where every happy moment will be earned and precious because we'll know it won't last forever." The children looked at each other, communicating in ways that went beyond words. They had been connected by consciousness for 22 years, sharing thoughts and feelings in ways that normal siblings never could. "We understand," Jake said finally. "But will we still be special when we come home? Will we still be connected like we are here?" "You'll always be special," Karen assured them. "And you'll always be connected because you're family. But you'll be connected in a real way, in a world where your connections are choices you make every day, not just magic that holds you together." Sophie, the artist, painted a picture in the air with her enhanced abilities, an image of the family in the normal world, older, changed, but united by bonds that were stronger for being chosen rather than imposed by temporal magic. "It will be beautiful in a different way," she said. Tommy, despite being the youngest, spoke with the wisdom of a child who had spent 22 years thinking about love and family. "I want to come home with you, even if it means my birthday party has to end." The decision made, the family joined hands in the center of the temporal field. But leaving wasn't as simple as walking out. They had to convince the anomaly itself to release them. "The place you created was born from love," Karen told her children. "So it has to be dissolved with love too. We need to thank this place for keeping you safe and happy, and then let it go." The children understood. Together, the 6 family members focused their combined consciousness on gratitude for the temporal sanctuary that had protected the children for over 2 decades, and then on their shared desire to return to linear time and normal reality. The temporal field responded like a living thing. The birthday party decorations began to fade. The infinite dimensions collapsed back into a single dining room, and the eternal cake began to age 22 years in the span of seconds, but gently, gradually, without violence or destruction. Outside the temporal field, Dr. Patterson's instruments registered the collapsing anomaly. The temporal distortions are decreasing rapidly. The field is dissolving. "Biosigns from the parents are stabilizing," Dr. Williams reported. "They're returning to normal space-time." Detective Chen watched through the opening as 6 figures became visible in the dining room. 2 adults and 4 children who were no longer frozen in time, but moving forward into an uncertain but real future. The Mitchell family stepped out of the temporal field together, hand in hand. Emma, Jake, Sophie, and Tommy looked exactly as they had 22 years earlier, but there was something different in their expressions, a maturity, a depth of understanding, and an appreciation for the world beyond birthday parties. "Detective Chen," Emma said as the family emerged, "thank you for bringing our parents to us." "We're ready to grow up now," Jake added. "We want to learn about the world that kept going while we were celebrating," Sophie said. "And I want to have another birthday," Tommy declared, "a real one, where I actually turned 7. The reunion was witnessed by scientists, FBI agents, and local police, but the most important witness was Detective Chen, who had seen a family destroyed by impossible circumstances choose love over eternal happiness, growth over comfort, and reality over magic. Dr. Patterson's final readings showed that the temporal anomaly had completely dissolved, leaving behind only a normal dining room with a 22-year-old birthday cake that finally looked its age, stale, dry, and covered with dust. But the children who had once celebrated in that room were alive, real, and ready to experience every birthday, every holiday, every difficult day, and every joyful moment that the normal world had to offer. In the weeks that followed, the Mitchell family faced the challenge of reintegrating into a world that had changed dramatically since 2002. The children had to learn about smartphones, social media, and a culture that had evolved significantly during their absence. Karen and David had to navigate co-parenting children who were chronologically in their 20s, but emotionally and physically still the ages they had been when they disappeared. But they faced these challenges together, supported by a bond that had been tested by impossible circumstances and strengthened by the choice to embrace reality over fantasy. The Mitchell house was renovated and became home to the reunited family. The dining room was restored to normal use, but every year on October 13th, they celebrated Tommy's birthday there, not with magic or temporal anomalies, but with the simple, precious reality of a family choosing to be together. Detective Chen was promoted to head a new FBI task force specializing in temporal anomalies and unexplained disappearances. Her experience with the Mitchell case had prepared her to handle the impossible, to investigate mysteries that existed at the intersection of love, consciousness, and the fundamental nature of reality. Emma Mitchell enrolled in high school at age 12 with the wisdom of someone who had experienced decades of perfect happiness and chose to embrace imperfect growth. Jake joined Little League despite being chronologically 32 because he wanted to experience real competition and real triumph. Sophie began creating art that depicted both magical and mundane realities, becoming a bridge between the impossible and the everyday. And Tommy finally turned 7, then 8, then 9, savoring each birthday because he understood what it meant to grow and change. The case of the untouched cake became legendary in paranormal investigation circles, not just because of its impossible evidence, but because of its resolution. It proved that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved through science or logic, but through love, sacrifice, and the courage to choose difficult reality over comfortable illusion. Years later, when Detective Chen was asked about the most important lesson she learned from the Mitchell case, her answer was always the same. I learned that the strongest force in the universe isn't time or space or even consciousness. It's a family's love for each other and their willingness to choose that love even when it means giving up paradise. The birthday cake that had remained fresh for 22 years crumbled to dust within hours of the children's return to normal time. But the family that had been separated by temporal impossibility remained strong, connected not by magic, but by the daily choice to love each other through every moment, perfect and imperfect alike. In the end, that was the real miracle. Not the cake that defied time, but the family that chose time over eternity, growth over stasis, and real love over perfect happiness. The birthday party was finally over. Real life could begin,